We've been through 5 full chapters of Fortnite now, and each one was good at different things. Today I'm here to go through each chapter and identify what each one was best at. Some chapters will end up having more than others. Before we get into the video, just want to say, be sure to like this video if you like this kind of content, subscribe. Trying to get to 10K. You guys have been absolutely amazing. Be sure to use code Rivy in the item shop. I actually got my first payout recently. Thank you guys so much for that. Anyways, I love you. Enjoy the video. And just a quick disclaimer, quick disclaimers. I'm going to go in order just because it makes sense. And I will not be doing chapter 6 for this video just because we're only one season in. So for chapter 1, we got map changes. I don't think chapter 1 had the best base map, but I do think it had the best changes, especially for its time. Even basic biomes like deserts and jungles were astounding additions back in chapter 1. And the back half of chapter 1 especially had really drastic map changes. Like the first half of chapter 1 was good too in the fact that there were a lot of good POIs added, but the back half of chapter 1 was the peak for map changes, I feel like. We went from desert to snow to jungle to futuristic to everything. Even in season 6, which didn't really have drastic map changes, the cube island moved around the map, which was super cool and never happened until then. I just don't think you can beat chapter 1 for map changes. Next is collabs. This is where a lot of people are going to be mad at me, but I don't care. Actually, real quick, try to think of a bad collab from chapter 1. I can't do it. I just feel like collabs in chapter 1 were legitimate tactics to make the game more fun and interesting. We got cool LTMs, cool weapons toward the end of chapter 1. I think collabs now are cooler because they're on a bigger scale, but it's a two-edged sword. On the one hand, the collab is really cool because it's so expansive and in-depth, but on the other hand, it kind of interferes with the BR gameplay in a way. I think collabs were best in chapter 1 where they weren't forced down your throat and they took the back seat instead of being in the main spotlight. Next is shotguns. I think chapter 1 had the best shotguns. To me, I don't think there's any way to beat the pump and the tack. You can make 1,000 copies, but I just don't think you can beat pump and tack. And there were other really good shotguns this chapter as well. Combat, double barrel, heavy shotgun, drum shotgun, obviously the spaz, and the gold and purple tack. There were really no flops this chapter with shotguns. Next up is vehicles. I don't really need to explain this one too much. There were a lot of vehicles added in chapter 1 and almost all of them were good. Mechs were the only miss, and really they could have been a good vehicle. They were just broken. And every other vehicle was great in its own way. And all the vehicles were super creative as well. Like the Baller, for instance. What an insane concept, and it worked like a charm. Quad crashers, hoverboards, planes were all really cool, and even golf carts, probably the most bland of all the vehicles, was still really cool at the time. I just don't think you can beat chapter 1 vehicles. And last but not least, we got LTMs. Now this one is kind of obvious since Epic stopped doing LTMs in like chapter 3, but LTMs in chapter 1 were much more impactful, so it gets the top spot. Disco Domination, 50v50, Soaring Squads, Infinity War, Solid Gold, just absolute poetry. And the thing about LTMs back in chapter 1 is that a lot of the collabs were in the LTMs, so it gave you an incentive to play them. And that made them so much more fun because you could only use the cool items in the LTM. I really wish LTMs would come back. And moving on to chapter 2, and for it, I've got base map. I think chapter 6 is very close, and maybe with time, it'll resonate and take the top spot, but there's something about the chapter 2 map that just feels so special to me. I think it's the POIs. I love chapter 2's POIs, and I think they're probably the best of any chapter. So chapter 2 gets my best POI vote as well. Every POI is unique and different, as well as good for loot. They also kept some of the best locations from chapter 1, so it's got the best of both worlds. Misty Meadows, Holly Hedges, Steamy Sacks, Sweaty Sands, Pleasant Park, Salty Springs, Retail Row. I love this map. This is very subjective, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Next up, we got events. Events were the best in chapter 2, hands down. Chapter 1 puts up a good fight, but chapter 2 prevails to me. This is probably because the lore was the best to me in chapter 2, but no matter the cause, the events were epic. Travis Scott brought something astronomical to the stage that really changed the way Epic approached the cinematics for events. As a result, the Doomsday event, Galactus event, and even the End event were all super visually captivating, even without the fancy schmancy graphics we have now. Each event was super intense and fun in its own way, and it gave you something to look forward to at the end of the season. Next up, we got Battle Passes. I think Chapter 2 and 1 are very close, but I think I gotta give it to Chapter 2. Probably just because there are more iconic characters in Chapter 2. Part of that has to do with the lore, but I just think Battle Passes in Chapter 2 were the best. Chapter 2 Season 4, Chapter 2 Season 3, Chapter 2 Season 2. Really, there's not a bad Battle Pass. Even in the bad seasons, there are still good Battle Passes. This was kind of the mix of like the classic OG feel of the Battle Passes, but they were also kind of starting to get adventurous with cosmetics and skins. It's just got kind of the best of both worlds, so I think Chapter 2 has the best Battle Passes. Next up, we got Mythic Weapons. This was pretty much the introduction of Mythic Weapons, and this is pretty much where they peaked. After Chapter 2, I just feel like Mythic Weapons really lost their identity. Chapter 3 just ruined them, in my opinion. The fact that everyone could get a Mythic became really prevalent in late Chapter 3, and I think that's where they messed up. But Mythics started going downhill in like Chapter 2 Season 5. Mythics would have been fine if they had just kept the same format, but they kept switching it up, and that was their demise. So Chapter 2 definitely did Mythic Weapons the best. They were the most fun and simple in Chapter 2. Next up, we got Season Themes. Almost every season's theme in Chapter 2 I think was really good, and the ones I didn't like are really just preference. Everything theme was uniquely different from one another, and they were all creative and original, except Cubed. That's really the only one I didn't love, but it was still cool-ish. Theme is huge, and I think the cool themes of Chapter 2 contribute to my enjoyment of the chapter. Last but not least is competitive. Competitive was at its peak this chapter. It's honestly hard to explain. I think the seasons really made competitive interesting. And now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I know most of you don't care about competitive, but just know competitive was the most fun to play and watch in Chapter 2. That leads me to Chapter 3, and the first one I have is movement mechanics. There were so many great movement mechanics added in Chapter 3, and I think they've stood the test of time well. Therefore, Chapter 3 deserves the crown. Sliding, sprinting, mantling, that's about it, but those mechanics were so revolutionary and are still used today. And it was so different from anything we ever saw up until then. Next up, we got assault rifles. I truly think Chapter 3 did the best with introducing ARs. We got the MK7, Striker Burst, Hammer AR, all of which are favorites of mine. This was the first chapter that implemented the red dot scope, and it paid off tremendously. And the Hammer AR, whew! It is disgustingly good. I don't know what it is about Chapter 3, but they were on their game about ARs. And even the couple that I didn't love, they were still alright. Like, they weren't bad in any way. And lastly, we got Mythic Movement Items. This is kind of specific. I really only did this because I want to give credit to the Spider-Man Mythic and Nimbus Cloud. Both were really goated, and they're still to this day the best Mythic Movement Items. And that's all I have for Chapter 3. And moving on to Chapter 4, we got Base Weapon Meta. I think the weapon meta at the beginning of Chapter 4 was the best and most interesting of all the starting metas. Good, fun shotguns, cool ARs with the red dot, and a good SMG with the twin mag. And the Excalibur rifle was cool too, even if I thought it was a little bit broken. Next up, we got movement items. Chapter 4 did a fantastic job with cool, creative movement items. The Shockwave Hammer was a super cool spin on shockwaves. The Kinetic Blade was a really on-theme item for Season 2. Season 3 didn't really have one, but Season 4 had the Rocket Ram, which was sick, even though it was very broken. Every movement item was very different and had different mechanics to them. And it was super refreshing every season to have a cool new movement item. Lastly, we have best feature with reality augments. I think reality augments are to this day one of the coolest features / mechanics they've ever added to the game. I love the whole idea. You get abilities throughout the game that don't make you overpowered, but they help you in fights. And I mean, some were just there for giggles. I mean, there was a party time one where you'd randomly get balloons. There was also Aerialist, which let you redeploy your glider. There was Soaring Sprints, which gave you a little shockwave when you jumped while sprinting. And that's like 3 out of 50. They kept adding more as the seasons progressed, and it was just really cool and fun to see which ones they were going to add. And last but not least, we got Chapter 5. And I have gameplay changes for this. I think Chapter 5 was best at creating drastic gameplay shifts. Did I always like them? No. But I can't deny the fact that Chapter 5 gave us the most variety when it comes to gameplay. Next up is new game modes. There were some banger game modes added in Chapter 5. Reload and Festival are the first two that come to my mind, but Lego and Rocket Racing definitely have something to be said about them. There's a good handful of people that like both those. And as much as some people hate on the metaverse, I just don't see how you can say that it's bad for the game. I mean, it's giving you more stuff to play, and Chapter 6 has proved that Battle Royale can still be fun in the metaverse era. But as for Chapter 5, the game modes they added were awesome, and they still are to this day. Anyways, that's gonna about do it for this video. Let me know what I missed down in the comments below, because I'm sure I missed something. Thank you guys for all the support. Sorry for the little break that I took, but I'm back now. That's what matters. Just be sure to like this video, subscribe, use code BrivianTheAtomShop. Anyways, I love you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.